There has definitely been a lot going on since the last time I made a WoW video, which is an understatement. I'd like to say that I have something big planned, something that could be even more groundbreaking than the Does Blizzard Really Hate Paladins series. I'm calling it Project Decade, and it started out as a way to show players what the semi-borrowed power upgrade system can do for them. I mean, you've given me a lot of good feedback on the general concept of upgrades and semi-borrowed power, but people on the forums and such, they're not seeing it. It's not getting them excited or getting them talking about it. I think I know what's missing. I figure people can get excited for it if I can show them what my semi-borrowed power upgrade system can do for them. Of course, there's a problem with that. I only play one spec, so I have only half an idea what other specs and classes want and what a good implementation would be to give them what they want with my semi-borrowed power upgrade system. Then again, I can show them, or you, a rough draft and iterate on that draft based on feedback. And now that I think about it, Blizzard ought to have a way to collect feedback for whatever they're doing in the next expansion. They're undoubtedly sensing that a lot needs to change. Not just at Blizzard as a workplace, but also in the game. Because they're bleeding subscribers and the competition's closing in. So if I put in the time and collect the feedback and iterate on my concept and Blizzard sees me doing it, then they'll see what it is that makes players feel excited to pick up the game again. Maybe I can give Blizzard that nudge in the right direction they sorely need now. There's no chance I can do this on my own. I'm definitely going to need volunteers to help me curate all the feedback that I'm going to get, but I really think this has a lot of potential. Especially now. I mean, Blizzard is in a scenario where leadership is very much in question at all levels. With the recent scandals, people are going to get shown the door. The higher ranked they are, the more likely it is that they knew something bad was going on and did nothing. And that means that the higher ranked they are, the more likely it is that they're going to get shown the door. And that means no direction at the exact moment when they need strong direction the most. Project Decade could really save Blizzard's bacon if they develop the humility needed to actually listen. So the purpose of Project Decade is snowballing here. It started as a trick to promote my player power idea, and now it's turning into the one thing that'll produce good vibes in the WoW community and give Blizzard what they need to save the game. Now, shoot. People bigger and smarter and better informed than me in the community have already given their 2 cents about the whole situation with harassment and discrimination at Blizzard. I do not support people who harass and discriminate, but there are so many developers at Blizzard who didn't do either of those that I don't think I can quit the game in good conscience. I mean, the ones that aren't innocent are the ones you hear about, but they're a tiny minority. If you let that tiny minority play a big role in forming your opinion of what Blizzard's like, while not allowing the majority of innocents to play a role in forming your opinion, well, that's just plain unfair. For that matter, punishing the innocent along with the guilty is the exact polar opposite of justice. That's why I'm not quitting the game. Not yet, anyway. But I'll tell you one thing. Someday, I would like to start my own game studio. Build it up into something AAA over the course of decades, maybe, God willing. If that happens, I'd probably end up retiring right when it reaches AAA status, given my own age. But if I ever do that, let me tell you what this scandal at Blizzard has taught me. I'm going to install cameras freaking everywhere to make sure that nothing like the situation at Blizzard ever develops. I mean, that's the only solution I see. There's the innocent until proven guilty camp, and there's the believer camp. And each of these philosophies, carried on to their logical conclusions, really do have the potential to create a highly toxic, frightening, and unjust environment. And the only way I see around it is cameras everywhere, so I can see who's telling the truth. So that's what I'm going to do if I ever get to achieve my dream. But for right now, I'm going to keep at it with my day job, keep at it with my side projects, and of course, the occasional World of Warcraft video. And there's one thing that's been coming up a lot with discussions of World of Warcraft, and I wanted to talk about it. It's looking to the past at systems and class design philosophies that are better than what we have today. It is not surprising. World of Warcraft had millions more players in the past than it does now, so it stands to reason that there are aspects of the game that were better then than what we have today. And for some reason, Mists of Pandaria is the expansion that keeps coming up. Personally, I remember some pretty big problems with Mists, and I figured I should make a video to remind everyone about the dangers of forgetting the problems of the day when you get nostalgic for something. Don't get me wrong, I loved my healing kit during Mists of Pandaria. It was actually really well done. I had single target builders and a single target spender. I had a multi-target builder with no cooldown and a multi-target spender. In general, it was a really good kit. Plus, I had a ranged direct damage spell with no cooldown. I keep clamoring for Blizzard to unprune the multi-target heal with no cooldown and the damage spell with no cooldown. The class design was better then. The only class design complaint I had at the time was that they forgot to add multi-target damage for me as a Holy Paladin, and that was quite anti-fun while soloing. Just ask Disciplined Priests during Legion. But as good as class design was, with small but infuriating exceptions, Mists had its problems, especially in the area of progression and gearing systems. And since systems are what people are complaining about, self included, I think we should discuss the systems in Mists, not to mention the systems that got replaced when Mists came out. I distinctly remember thinking during Mists that it was the worst expansion to date at the time it was released. I really do. Partly it was because I actually liked my class design a little better during Cataclysm due to the fact that there were more class-level abilities and therefore more buttons for me to press, including a ranged direct damage spell, multi-target damage spells, and a multi-target heal that eventually had no cooldown. All that was a big part of it. But it was also partly because the expansion as a whole felt, honestly, a little silly. I mean, it was a Horde versus Alliance expansion, and that should have been cool. But its marketing was more like there's a new area to explore full of kung fu pandas, rabbits that speak in broken English, and Chinese architecture. No world-ending threats this time. Go have fun exploring it. You know, that actually sounds pretty good these days, but it felt like its marketing didn't give us a direction for where things were going. And while Vanilla's marketing didn't either, after 2 expansions of knowing exactly who the final boss of the expansion would be and having marketing surrounding that final boss and giving direction to the whole expansion, a 4th expansion that lacked that directed marketing felt weird, devoid of the stuff that it should have had. Not to mention the fact that kung fu pandas and anthropomorphic rabbits that speak in broken English are just plain silly. I mean, I get that the threats up until Mists had been escalation after escalation, from a demon invasion to a life-ending undead threat to a literal world destruction threat. After all that escalation, we did need to cool down, much like we need to cool down after Legion and with another Horde versus Alliance expansion, but Battle for Azeroth, with all its faults, didn't have a silly vibe to its aesthetics and settings. Mists did, and it clashed with what World of Warcraft was about. With that spiel out of the way, there was a third reason why I thought Mists was the worst expansion to date while I was playing it, and that's the reason I'm going to spend the most time on in this video. That third reason is that there were 2 systems that worked really well in Cataclysm that got removed in Mists. Yes, I am actually praising not 1, but 2 systems. Who would have thought it in this expansion? And I will defend that praise of those systems in this very video. Anyhow, those 2 systems that I loved and lost were Tabards and the Justice and Valor Point system. The Tabard system was a pretty nifty trick for gaining reputation with whichever faction you wanted. Dress your character in the given faction's Tabard, then hop into any old dungeon in Wrath of the Lich King and kill things. You'd get a little reputation for each enemy you killed, put in enough time, and you would find yourself exalted. And since high-end gear was available for you when you hit exalted, there was a real incentive to get those tabards and run a lot of dungeons. The faster you ran them, the faster you hit exalted, too. Wrath of the Lich King is this expansion that invented that system. It was an improvement on the system in the Burning Crusade, where specific dungeons improved your reputation with specific factions. Here, any dungeon could give you reputation for any faction. Cataclysm did not attempt to fix what wasn't broken, and I remember quite distinctly that this system was fun. I had a goal in mind, gear myself up for raiding with my guild, and I worked at it. I figured out which gear slots I could fill in using professions, which ones I could fill in using valor points, which is another system I'll get into later, and which slots I could fill in using reputation gear. I figured out which dungeons dropped gear that could fill in the other slots, and I ran those dungeons. I maxed out the reputations that would help me the most first, and voila! I became a valued healing workhorse for my guild by the end of it. I loved it. Of course, as fun as that climb was, there was a problem. Well, a problem if you're Blizzard. Not as much of a problem if you're a player, but still a problem. Once I had accomplished the goal, and gotten myself geared and gotten my reputations maxed out, there wasn't really any incentive for me to keep logging in except to raid. If I hadn't been in a raiding guild during patch 4.0, I'd probably have stopped logging in altogether. From Blizzard's perspective, this was very not good. Of course, probably the real solution, the best solution, would have been for Blizzard to keep the content coming thick and heavy and rapid fire. Give us another chapter for the stories, another dungeon or three to explore, and keep them coming at a good, fast cadence. But Blizzard was either unable or unwilling to do that. So in Mists of Pandaria, they got rid of tabards and instead made reputations a long and painful grind of daily quests. There were daily quests for reputation in Cataclysm as well, but those were nicely supplemented with the tabard system. Not so in Mists of Pandaria. Of course, different factions had different daily quests. It was a lot like world quests today, only with less ability to pick and choose which ones you were actually going to do. And the point of that was to simply make reputation progression take longer and force players to keep logging in over a longer period of time. That's right, they didn't change their content releasing cadence to fit players' progression rate, they changed the progression rate to fit their content releasing cadence. It gets worse. Remember how I said that during Cataclysm, raid level gear was something you could unlock if you got to Exalted Reputation with a given faction? Well, guess what? Blizzard took away the quick, easy, and fun way to grind reputation and replaced it with the long, sucky, annoying way to grind reputation, and kept the raid level gear locked behind Exalted Reputations. That's right, Exalted. That meant anyone wanting to get geared for raiding would feel pressured by the systems that existed in the game at the time to do those long, sucky, annoying reputation grinds, no matter how long, sucky, and annoying they were. Ugh. Just ugh. As of the time I am writing this, Bellular released a video recently about how Blizzard makes the mistake of paying attention to what players do rather than thinking about how players feel. That problem started all the way back in Mists of Pandaria. Instead of thinking about how players would feel when they needed to do those long and ugly reputation grinds, Blizzard thought about what players would do when they needed those long and ugly reputation grinds. And what they were thinking was, they'll keep logging in. And Blizzard thought that was a good thing. They keep logging in and do things that feel bad. Not a wise system. This was perhaps the start of the takeover of terrible systems in the game, and it was obviously done just to keep players logging in, apparently in lieu of simply releasing lots and lots of content to keep players interested, the way Final Fantasy XIV does. Speaking of Final Fantasy XIV, I haven't tried it. I don't really have any plans to try it, though I might someday. But there is a concept that Final Fantasy XIV stole from World of Warcraft and kept in their game for over a decade that has served them and their players extremely well. A concept that existed in World of Warcraft during Cataclysm and that was one of the best gearing systems I've ever seen. A system that Blizzard discarded when Cataclysm rolled into Mists. And that is the Justice and Valor Point system. I've heard Bellular Gaming talk about it multiple times, but the fact is, not everyone is familiar with it. It was over a decade ago that it was in the game. And it's really too bad. That system actually worked extremely well. It was a simple system, which is always a promising way to start. And I should tell you how it works so you'll understand why Bellular and I have been singing its praises. Valor Points were the currency you really wanted to have, because there was a vendor in your capital where you could exchange Valor Points for gear that was on par with raid level gear. At the time, you obtained Valor Points from defeating raid bosses or from beating the first heroic dungeon you queued for each day. That had two benefits. The first is that even if you didn't get any loot from killing a raid boss, you got your Valor Point currency, and that at least was something. The second benefit was that even players who weren't in raiding guilds or who didn't yet have the gear necessary to enter raids were able to grind up Valor Points and get the high-end gear. Not every gear slot could be filled this way. Weapons and shields couldn't, shoulders and pants couldn't, and I forget what all else. But the fact that pretty much every player could get Valor Points was a major plus. Justice Points were the next best thing. Randomly running non-heroic dungeons rewarded you Justice Points, and every heroic dungeon you queued for after your first heroic of the day would reward you Justice Points instead of Valor. And Justice Points genuinely did have their uses. You could use them to purchase gear that was one step below the high-end stuff. At the time of Cataclysm's release, it was on par with gear that dropped from heroic dungeons. And since you couldn't fill every slot with Valor Point purchases, Justice Points were useful in filling in some of those slots, in cases where the random number gods didn't fill in those gaps from gear that you'd got dropped from heroic dungeons. Again, Justice Points could fill some of those slots, but not every slot. I remember I had to get my healing weapon from dungeon drops, and I didn't even get the weapon that I'd wanted, but I did get a passable one in the end, and that's the important thing. And everything I've just said about what you could purchase with Justice Points only applied until the Firelands patch was released. Then the following things happened to Justice Points, Valor Points, and the things you could buy with them. Number 1, all the gear that had been on the Valor Point vendor got moved to the Justice Point vendor. What used to be top-end rating gear no longer was. It was now the next best thing. So Justice Points could still be used to purchase the next best thing. Number 2, the Valor Point vendor received brand new gear whose item level was on par with the Firelands raid drops. And number 3, each player's Justice Points were converted into gold and their Valor Points were converted into Justice Points. You want the best stuff? You work for it in this patch. You can see how elegant this system really was, and is if you play Final Fantasy XIV. It provides a catch-up mechanism. It provides rewards for doing content. It provides a way for players of all skill levels to get their hands on high-end gear while still keeping high skill more rewarding than low skill. But then, like the Tabard system, Blizzard got rid of the Justice and Valor Point system. There wasn't really any equivalent system in Mists of Pandaria either. You wanted gear, you either crafted it with a profession, got it from reputation grinds, or got it from a dungeon drop. You know, I remember drawing out a chart of the progression system we had in Cataclysm, and then I tried to draw out the progression chart for Mists, and I just couldn't. I got confused. I didn't know whether looking for raid was intended to be a step in the progression or not. And don't get me started on that short-lived experiment called scenarios. In any case, Mists was a great deal more grindy and annoying than Cataclysm was, replacing a fun, elegant, flexible, versatile system with an anti-fun, clunky drag of a system. All to try to get players to keep logging in. When you think about it, that's not how it works. You don't take fun out of a game to get players to keep coming back to it. You put more fun into the game. That's why I'm 100% on the same page with Bellular when he says the devs should keep the content coming instead of creating complex and annoying systems. If I could get WoW to bring back even one system from the old days, hands down it would be the Justice and Valor system. It was flexible, rewarding for the player, and it was even flexible for the developers because they could provide useful rewards from whatever content they thought was good. If they want to add something to be fun and incentivized without being too rewarding, then boom, just add Justice Points as a reward. And if they want something to be tough and require a lot of skill and coordination to be a kind of a stretch goal, boom, add Valor Points as a reward. Simple, it's elegant, it's versatile, it's rewarding and useful for players and developers alike. The fact that Final Fantasy XIV never dropped their clone of the Justice and Valor Point system, even though WoW did, is to me a sign that this concept really works. I am so glad that Yoshi P, the developer who revamped Final Fantasy XIV from a broken mess into the WoW killer it is today, played during Cataclysm. Want to know something else that's funny? I really thought World of Warcraft was at its best during Cataclysm, which I realize is an outlier opinion among players. Most players think it peaked around Wrath of the Lich King. Actually, it was only after I had written this whole script out and thought about it before recording it that I realized me being nostalgic for Cataclysm is yet another example of why people should, in general, beware of nostalgia, because it can make you forget about the problems that existed at the time. In fact, you're going to have to remind me in the comments what those problems were, because I don't remember any big problems other than running out of things to do once I got geared up. I guess what makes me nostalgic for Cataclysm more than Wrath was that Cataclysm was when I was raiding. It was when the luck of the draw gave me the class design that I was happiest with. Seriously, I have never been happier with the class design of Holy Paladins than I was at the end of Cataclysm. But there is one thing that holds true regardless of which expansion you're the most nostalgic for, whether it's Wrath, Cataclysm, Mists, or whatever. And that one constant is, even the expansion you're nostalgic for had its issues. And sometimes they were really big, really deep issues. Sure, your favorite expansion might have truly been objectively better than what we have today, for real, genuine, logical, well thought out reasons. But don't forget that whichever expansion it was, there was room for improvement even then, and it did have its problems. But that also means it's possible to learn from the mistakes the devs made then and come up with an even better product. If Team 2 ever learns some humility and hindsight, those will be necessary to turn World of Warcraft around, and I intend to do my part in helping them turn WoW around with Project Decade. I hope you'll join me and help me refine the upgrades I'm coming up with into something that would get players excited to pick up WoW again. But until I release those Project Decades videos, remember, even what you're nostalgic for did have its problems back in the day.